You're experiencing the Authentic Chaos Podcast, an exploration into our inner selves and journeys of self-discovery. I'm your host, Bahagan Yarnosian, and I'm joined today by Stephen Ritchie, host of the Power of Perspective with Stephen Ritchie. Welcome, Stephen.
Hey, Vahakan. It's really awesome to be back. It's really good to be on a podcast again. Maybe it'll get a bit of life into me. And it's just good to catch up with you. It's been a while. And yeah.
Yeah, it has been a while. It's been a couple months. I've been traveling. You've been busy, and you know that these things happen, right? Like it's like the tide; it comes in and out. But now I'm like finding a swell of inspiration to do these.
Yeah. I mean, you get kind of that craving, right? Where it's like, oh, now I want to talk about this. And yeah.
Yeah, and like oh, like maybe this is something that would be interesting for people to hear about. And that's actually one of the reasons why I reached out to you about this episode. So I wanted to talk about perspective and, power of perspective. We kind of talked about this on a prior episode, and I'll like post a link in the description for that conversation. But I want to go stay more onto like, what is perspective and how do we potentially change it? So maybe we can start with the first. Like, you've done a lot of thinking on perspective. So how would you define perspective?
Well, in an almost academic sort of description, it's it's how we see the world, right? I think there's a sort of fluidity to it. It's both kind of like a spectrum and like kind of different aspects to it, but also it's like on a timeline. So I think it's almost a reflection of what you've learned in life and your experiences and how you interpret the world through that. And so, the same scenarios can happen to you as another person, and you can have, wildly different takeaways and inspirations from it, and, even different drives and, interpretations of what those drives, lead to action. And so, yeah, it's so important. It leads to how we interact with the world and how we form our thoughts and opinions and really, I think, enjoy that intellectual side of ourselves. And yeah, I'll leave it there. It's a big one, and I think a lot of people sort of maybe don't fully embrace the idea. There's this kind of autopilot sort of mode we go on in life. That's very easy. The world's become very busy, and so to stop and think, why are the things around me this way, and what do I think about them, as opposed to just I see it, X. I think about it, don't think too hard, don't really think what's under there and what it means to me. And you go on, and I think part of perspective is kind of a lot can be gained if you just kind of stop and just, in the moment, absorb and just, think about, there's just a bit more here than, events happening to us, and we meet people and they're just a person and that's just a moment. People are special. Moments are special and impactful. And I think it's nice to acknowledge and learn to understand that, and if anything, makes life more fun. Yeah.
I think that's like a really good definition and really good like chat on what perspective is, and it really goes to the heart of what I believe perspective is, which is like this, like it really is like this blanket in your mind. Like it's about how you see the world, it's how you think about the world, it's how you think about yourself. It's about it. It like pervades so much of our lived experience.
Yeah, it's almost a reflection of who we are at every moment. And that's, you know beyond just gathering what my perspective is now, gathering what that reflects about who I am now, and just kind of letting that sink in and enjoying like this is kind of how I am as a person now, and this is why the world means that to me, and being uh, cognizant and even proud of like maybe I've come a long way in how I view things. Maybe I'm not as judgmental. Maybe I'm more understanding. And so these kind of limitations and roadblocks we've put for ourselves, we can in a healthy way break them down or move them around a bit and go into new territories and embrace things that maybe we were a little scared to,
Yeah.
or maybe it was just not stuff we felt was expected of us, and so we didn't go there, as we do a lot in this world.
Yeah. It can be so difficult to identify what your perspective is, or that your perspective is unique, or that you have a perspective, right? Like you said about the autopilot stuff. Like, it's easy to think that your perspective of the world is actually reality. That like
Yeah,
everyone had like that, and it's to the point that like you think that like, oh well, everyone has this same perspective.
yeah, it's we're tied to our assumptions, right?
Yeah.
It kind of takes the maybe a little bit of the special, maybe a little bit of the individuality, away from us. Exactly, and also your peer groups kind of maybe also put a bit of fog of war and a blocker of, you know, like, I'm in this culture, I'm in this location. Immediately, my perspective's unique. I've had this experience. Um, maybe I had a really good upbringing. Maybe I didn't. That's like core parts of your worldviews. Maybe this qualities in this person that wasn't good for me, I associated with other aspects of the world, and it's the lens
Mm.
I look through. And sometimes it's just healthy to understand why we view things, because maybe we just do it, it's because it's all we know, and maybe not all we think, but it's all we experience.
I 100% agree. It is such a healthy activity to think, why, to even just reflect on times where you did have a different perspective. And what you're saying about friend groups and like the people who you're around and the culture that you're in shaping your perspective, I think is so true and so powerful and so relatable, right? Like, think of like, and maybe to the audience, think of a time where maybe you were your perspective, your assumptions were guided by the people around you, or shaped by the people around you, or the culture that you were in, right? And uh, maybe you have, I mean, maybe you, Stephen, do you like, maybe you have some examples of like, or at least one example of where maybe in the past your perspective was shaped by your environment or the people around you, if you'd care to share one.
Oh no, always happy to share. I think you know part of it's sort of tied to life phases. Um, as a kid, everything's just what you accept, and I think everything we thought of was just what's the latest craze? What are my friends doing? What's the next collectible, the next game? And the people around me is just who's around me, and no one else matters, and no one else exists. Then you go into university, and all of a sudden it's like this knowledge is kind of like everywhere, and you see passion around you and drive and ambition, and people actually seeking purpose, not just sitting in the moment, actually just finding their passions, and even wanting to change the world, or just wanting to make more of life than they're given. And yeah, and then the working world.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I came back to Cape Town, the after being at university, what I did not realize is that everyone. the world doesn't go on pause when you're not there. So all my friends and people, moved out into the world, and some of them did amazing things. There was this guy who was, making drones for big, I think US company,
Nice.
and so on. And you hear all the exciting stories of what people got up to, and then I had to sort of actually rebuild my social group, and so I have to think, you know, what does it mean to make friendships and social connections? Why is it important to me? And this especially was emphasized in the lockdown thing, when you realize, what kind of person are you? I realized that I'm quite an extrovert. I'm quite socially driven. Interactions and intellectual discussion and humor and just connection was important to me. And so when there was a taken away, I struggled, and I never had thought about that. And I actually had to decide, what kind of people do I enjoy. I'm quite an active person. I'm I like more chill, just chilling at home or cooking together. I found myself, actually, I feel like quite a simple person. I don't need fancy things or big exciting activities. That's all good and all, but I think just quality time with quality people, just hanging out, maybe an activity. I'm a little bit competitive, and so a little bit of a game or something, or just kind of trying something new. Food. I'm really into food, and I realized, hosting a dinner party, cooking for people, that little thing. There's a lot of joy there. So, having to put socialization, as a something I had to think about. It's something that a lot of people it's just given, right? High school's a great example. You almost like put in a box. You're like, here's 10 people. They make sense. You're part of that clique, and all of a sudden now, I am my clique. I am the domain of who I want to be, and I can actually go and choose where to look for people, and also have to develop myself, because I'm approaching people and being like, this is the product I am, or this is, who I want to be. And, I want to be someone that looks out for the people around me. And in return, have people who do the same, right? Because there's a trust element to that. And so, that shaped a lot of my thoughts of just, there's a lot more to socializing and making connections, than just being around people and just doing what they enjoy. And I think there's more to that. And when you put in, it's interesting. I think perspective a lot comes from when your norm is shaken. You deal with a big challenge,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden, how you were thinking does not work anymore. And training wheels are off. Now you got to relearn a bit of yourself and a bit of the world, overcome a challenge, and you know have to look at the things that maybe you don't want to look at, or you haven't had to, or the people around you discourage you at looking at, which I also experienced in my youth. So, I mean, yeah, that's just an idea of something that I think maybe a lot of people have dealt with, and hopefully they got out of it without it. And lockdown had that impact specifically on people. And yeah, we all got shaken up a bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like really like awesome stuff in that, like in that whole like analogy and that story. I love that you kind of talked on like not just changing your perspective of the world, but also of yourself. Like your perspective around social situations is realizing that it's not just the people around you, but also like you are now like that center of your social circle. You are the one that creates the social environments for you.
Yeah. And it's not just about what do the other people do for me. It's a bit about what do I do for them and what do I want to do for them.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it really goes to the so I think this goes to the heart of where, like you said, being in different situations, maybe facing adversity, being in different environments, it gives us these opportunities to see different perspectives and to like experience the world and ourselves a little bit differently. But it's up to us to decide if we're going to take those lessons on and look deeper, or I mean, plenty of people are put into different environments all the time, but sometimes instead of like saying, "Oh wait, maybe my perspective was one-sided," they say, "Oh well, the world is wrong. I am right, the world is wrong. I don't need to change."
No. Well, I think, it's sometimes also it's good to look at the other, over the fence and be like, other people came to what they believe and how they experience the world through a lot of trial and error and struggle and joy. And I find this interesting when people sometimes go into a bit of a debate sort of discussion, not formal, but just in general.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, in this discussion, I'm going to change what you think. And I'm going to kind of discredit, your ability to come up with things and your whole timeline, as opposed to realizing that it took a lot for someone to have the perspective they have. And I think this maybe it's nice to respect that, and just maybe even understand, where they're coming from. Why is that view of the world important to them, and what in their life story led them there.
What do you think drives people to like want to debate or want to like kind of convince someone that they're wrong?
It's, I think people get comfortable maybe in a perspective. And so, because you don't have to challenge things. And you can almost go like a bit have a grandiose idea of everything I believe is perfectly right. And the world as it is how it's always going to be. And, and that security, we all look for security, right? It's almost a fundamental need. But it comes at the cost of anything that shakes that up and changes that is a threat, because maybe we aren't doing the best in our situation that we could be, and maybe some of our views are problematic, and maybe we're scared that um, we have to give them up, and all of a sudden our identity is challenged and our worth is challenged. You've been believing this thing for a long time, and if they don't believe it, or you're then they're inferior. And if I give up my opinion, it's like a power struggle. Then what I had before, you know um, I must have been flawed to come up with it. And it's discrediting that you can change, and who you are at the moment doesn't have to be perfect. And learning can be a safe space in who you are. And I think, yeah, it's that, and that absoluteness of one perspective is the diode all perspective. For instance, I think in your life there's going to be many pivotal moments when your perspective will change, and that's very healthy. And there's so much in the world that to think you've got it all in one basket, and that's all there is to the story. It's maybe you're missing out a bit, and maybe you're not giving them a chance. Yeah, this happens with political views, right? With hobby views, with people views. And you subscribe to a group, and they all just say, "Well, I'm part of this group, and everyone around me seems happy with what we think, and so I must be happy with what we think." And everyone else is the enemy. And maybe that's a bit of it.
Yeah. Once again, beautifully said. The only thing I would also add is I think the same lessons can be tied inward. Like our perspective of ourselves is as crucial as our perspective of the world, and is probably some of the first perspectives we need to change. For instance, maybe the reason that, like, why should we be tying our thoughts so deeply to our identity? Maybe that itself is like a narrow perspective that needs to be broadened. And maybe like considering our thoughts to be less attached to us and more of a byproduct of kind of our mind would be beneficial to help us like accept other opinions and other perspectives more easily. And maybe our perspective on our ability to change, right? There's this like belief that like you can't change after a certain age, that at some point you stay constant. But if you ask anyone if they were the same 10 years ago as they are today, most likely they'll say like, no, I'm quite different than I am today. And it's like, okay, well, then you clearly have changed. So what happened that you can't change anymore?
Yeah, you've reached a bit of a stencil, and
Or
you
or
know,
there is no plateau. I think that we're always capable of changing. It's just a matter of perspective.
yeah, and lucky for us, we've got this gift of everyone around us has got a perspective. Everyone's done the legwork and has built up perspective, whether they've cognizantly acknowledged what their perspective is. And so you've got all these baskets around you to, grab a fruit there, grab a fruit there, and listen to people. Really, really just listen. Don't just say, just be there and, have to preach everything you view to every person and not have to change and not have to let them change you.
Yeah. Yeah. Um
I
oh sorry, go ahead.
so so I mean, I just wanted to share a South African. Not all matters of perspective are, relational, and not all matters of perspective are, your life story and your background and your day to day. Some of it's broader ideals and broader moments, and so realizing in Cape Town and in actually all South Africa, we've got this phenomenon called load shedding. And so what happens basically, it's been around actually quite a long time, but we're not the most publicized nation to the world. And so they basically just, I don't know, ten years ago, whatever, said that, cool guys, our power capacity is running low. There was a couple of decisions that were made. They were maybe a bit short-sighted, and as things go, and so they realized that there was no plan to expand capacity and to maintain the systems properly, and so the warnings were sort of ignored. And so we had the system where, okay, well, power's running out, the grid's going to collapse, and so we're going to basically divvy out power loss into schedule. And so have stage one, which is basically, a 2 hour slots, every second day. Then you got stage two, which is a 2 hour slot of your power is turned off, and for that. And then all the way up to 6, where you have like 2 hours 3 times a day, and
Mm.
there's no power. And adapting to a world with no power, it's like interesting little example of resilience building. So like, so Africans are very like, they say, I know this is just Afrikaans culture, but there's this thing of a boer maak 'n plan, which a boer in Afrikaans is a farmer, because the Afrikaans community came from farming. But
Hmm.
anyways, the sayings like, we will always, any situation, be able to figure it out, make a plan, and get through. And we've got that resilience. And so anyway, so yeah, all this power going off. So now everyone's like got alternate power things like inverters and batteries and solar power, and now everyone's adjusted their schedule. So if there's a load shedding slot, all of a sudden every restaurant in the area is packed, and now everyone's like all of a sudden seeing the world around them. And so there's these little community gatherings that happen, and the conversations are around the load shedding. And so this thing that was a given, infrastructure, that was challenged. And um, now your comfort zone breaks a bit, and we had to kind of learn a bit of a new world. And initially, I mean, people still do complain a lot and just said, I'm a victim of the world. But a lot of people move towards oh, this is the situation, and we adapt. You we go stronger. We can have a laugh about it. Not everything's the end of the world, and a new reality is born out of just a world situation that's a bit bigger than our immediate environment. And so yeah, that it's interesting. And so maybe the Cape Verdeans felt a bit of what it's like maybe to not live with power. Um, but for a Western group, it was very, very interesting. And yeah, we've got very a lot of interesting stories that come out of the news related to it. So yeah.
Yeah. How do you find that that this load chilling has like, because you were in South Africa for before the pre-load chilling time, right?
Yes, exactly.
So how did that
The
change your perspective on like on the world?
Well, it made me realize that when things are good and when you've got like the things you want and stuff, I mean, firstly, it's good to appreciate it, but also just thinking that the only way to enjoy life is a certain way, and you know that things will never get better in any situation, and that it's like if we have no internet, well, it would feel like the world stops, and with power, it feels like the you know the country will stand still, and it did at some points, and it still does. But also there's a lot of innovation, and like when any crisis, people innovate, people find new ways to help the community and new ways to socialize. And I think just people learned that ingenuity is it's never a thing that you should take for granted, that you never need to use again. Making a plan and adapting, that's that's part of life. And staying in your box forever, well, maybe you do live a life and you're always in the same box and you never have to experience a new reality, but maybe you're not, and maybe just be open to maybe life can be lived in different ways, and maybe one day you'll want to live in a different way, or maybe the world will force it, and maybe don't be scared of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it shows like the power and the beauty of human resiliency, the resiliency of culture, like this thing that, people couldn't really control, but life goes on.
No, you're all stronger than you think. And
Yeah.
when moments come to test you, this is when you learn.
Yeah. And maybe like a lesson here is trust, self trust. Trust in yourself that no matter what happens in the future, you'll figure it out. You're resilient.
Yeah. So yeah, and don't be scared to you know joke about, sometimes take a light-hearted thing. Not everything in life is a train smash. Maybe it's just the next step along the journey. Do you think just people are like can be scared of like any change and
Hmm.
anything that it's like, oh, this is my best thing at the moment. If it's not my best thing ever, um, how would I go on? No, you go on. Maybe it'll you know unlock better things for you.
Yeah. I was, this is very relevant to a conversation I was having earlier this week with a buddy of mine who said he was like, has been thinking about moving to Europe for a while, but his concern is that he doesn't know if he can make a friend group there because every place that he's lived since college basically had a friend group there already, which made it easy for him to join, like be in a social environment. But if he were to move to a place that he knew nobody, he doesn't know if he would survive because he didn't know if he could figure out how to make friends.
Yeah. Well, I think you learn fast and you adapt fast when you put in the deep water. I mean, I could, from my perspective, it's very possible and very doable, but it's challenging making social connections. It's not for free, but I think you can make friendships that you would have never made elsewhere, and
Yeah.
you can grow in ways you never thought you did, and maybe it even encourages a bit of self growth. So yeah, it also, I mean, it'll depend on the culture, maybe of the people around him. It's interesting. Things like how people treat other people, or people's idea of respect, and even mannerisms and people's worldviews. Those can be barriers that sometimes people can't overcome. But then also there can be assets that can be like a driving thing of, oh wow, these people live in such a cool way. This is so exciting, and now I just want to make friends like them. So there's a bit of roll the dice, but there's also a bit of resilience and potential. And I hope it really works out for your friend. But I
Yeah.
think, we're all social beings. At some level, it's part of our design. Um,
Hmm.
but it's an area, even our comfort zones, people I think struggle with. So
And they're good
yeah,
people everywhere. There are good people everywhere. There are people with your interests everywhere. Like we like to, we think we're in such unique bubbles, because we live in our heads. We see the people that we hang out with certain groups of people, and it's easy to think like, oh, I might not be able to find these people elsewhere. But is that really that realistic? If you were able to find these people once, you could probably find similar people everywhere.
no, I mean, there's many crowds for every person.
Hmm.
So don't be bound by, if I don't find the crowds I've had in the past, I won't find a crowd. Th- That's just that's not true, right?
Yeah.
If anything, the only reason there wouldn't be is if you stop allowing that to be. So maybe don't have too rigid idea of what my next group will look like. Just give me a chance and try to understand, why people are the way they are and why they think the way they do. I think sometimes it's people struggle with, oh, this, everyone here believes this thing and does this activity, and it's so out of my norm that I'm just going to never give them a chance, and I write off. Some people actually write off a population group and just be
Yeah.
like, um, "Ooh, those people don't have the." I mean, I've heard this, like, that group doesn't have a proper perspective on the world. Imagine judging like a whole group's perspective, or they don't have a worldview. They're so in their little boxes that they don't have to look at the rest of the world, or and that what they think is normal to someone outside maybe isn't. But maybe that goes two ways.
And that's so interesting to me because, like, I mean, everyone has a worldview. It's like an implicit idea of what the world is. Like, there's no way like, this is something that is developed as early as childhood. Like, your interactions with the outside world is you building a worldview.
Yeah. So I think when in doubt, there's a couple key things to think about. Most of the people around you are rational, right? They think logically. They're fairly intelligent. Most people around you are going to act in their best interests. Funny enough, this is something I heard through business coaching. But and so uh, they don't think weirdly. Like, people don't think weirdly. They just have come from a different perspective and have come to different understandings through a mix of biology and
Hmm.
environment. And for the most part, people are trying to be happy. People that's value the way people respond to them around it. I know there's this, don't give a shit sort of mentality, and there's a lot of not letting how people judge you control your life, but also we want to be part of a group. And so these core sort of drivers and realities, they're in most of the people around you. And so you're not around all these aliens that you can't relate to. They're just
Yeah.
they're just people figuring it out. And you know we're all a little bit of a outcome of circumstance. So even they forgive a bit. they're not how I like, but maybe it's not their fault. But keep to yourself. Don't give up on your ideals, but give other ones a chance. And just realize we're all human. We all make mistakes. We all struggle at times, and we all, in some capacity, want to bring in the best in ourselves and the best for the people around us. We show it in different ways, but I think in a lot of the cases it's true. So just keep that in mind. Don't just say write off groups of people or write off certain ideas. Challenge those ideas and make your own conclusions. Don't just give in and be like, I'm just gonna accept everything around me. But really think about it and see, can this mold fit with the mold I've gotten? Did these Lego pieces go together, or can I find a way to put them together? And when you realize that we're all people, it makes it a lot easier, but it also makes it a lot less pressure, and there's a lot less anger. I find a lot of anger comes from people not understanding this. People just say, that person's goal in life has been put on this earth to ruin my life, or that person's thinking is just not the way I've decided early on that I would ever want um, to think.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that's a valuable lesson I learned, I think.
Yeah, I mean, those are all really valuable lessons. And maybe part of it is like that perspective on yourself, to allow yourself the grace to be wrong, and to be wrong in a safe way. Maybe wrong isn't the right word, but maybe you don't know yourself as well as you think you do. And maybe you'll find friends in areas that in ways you didn't expect, because you find yourself connecting with people that you didn't think you'd connect with, because maybe the issue is that we're thinking too narrowly about ourselves and about others.
No, for sure. How you start in this world is not how you ended the world, right?
Yeah.
I found my best friendships did not fit into my earlier models. My favorite activities did not fit into the early models in my life. And the things I value and the views, politically and socially and even just humanitarianly, those maybe weren't what I started with, or things I didn't think about. And now maybe I'm drawn to them. And yeah, um, it's a journey, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've got an anecdote that I can share about how my worldview has shifted over the years.
Yeah.
So so growing up, my parents are Armenian, and my dad immigrated to the U.S. from Armenia, and was still is, but when I was growing up was much more nationalistic for Armenia than he is today. But his perspective really shaped a lot of my worldview and my identity. It made me think in in a more Armenian nationalist way early on in my years. But then as I grew, as I expanded, I started to learn certain things about myself. Like, first of all, I was taught to hate Turkish people because of how they genocided our peoples, and that was something that literally changed. Like, it affected how I viewed Turkish people. Like, I became uncomfortable when there was someone who was of Turkish descent, nearby. Even if I just saw the name, it would make me feel weird. And I was around a lot of anger growing up, and a lot of that anger made me feel very uncomfortable. So feeling this anger within me, it just made me inherently feel very uncomfortable. So over years, I was thinking, like, why should I hold this? I shouldn't hold this grudge against people I don't even know. And then it helped to meet Turkish people who were very kind and friendly, and we didn't really have any ill will toward each other. And I think that helped expand my view there to be more accepting and like to relinquish this anger that was passed down to me from generations past. And even more than that, like I've also, because I was Armenian, I've always been taught about the ancientness of our people, the history of our people being an ancient one. And so a lot of my view of history was through a very narrow lens. But as I read more, as I understood the wisdom of others and the thoughts of others through reading about history and like understanding the history of people and how civilization came about, like how did we get to this point, right? How did we start off in jungles and get here talking on a podcast over the internet with electricity and like all these things, right? Like a lot of things had to happen for that to happen. And like I love building this I love building this rich worldview of the perspective of humanity because it has given me a broader view and a broader understanding. So, like, I even recognize that my worldview was very Mesopotamia focused. That, like, I knew that a lot of human civilization came from Mesopotamia, but it's not just Mesopotamia. Mesoamerica and Indochina also had similar civilizations popping up at the same time, and like similar things were developed at the same time, like writing systems and mathematical systems among these people that really didn't have ways of communicating with each other. So it shows that like even though these people were so different, like literally so different that they were worlds apart, they still like came up with similar ways of designing culture, designing structure, designing language. They had similar ways of thinking. And it really made me appreciate that we are all we are way more similar than we are different. But it is the uniqueness that I love to understand.
Yeah. No, exposure to different groups and different people, it is creates so much insight. If anything, give it a chance. Go to a community maybe you're not used to. I'm not saying don't go places that are safe, but I find some of the most prejudicial sort of communities, that are very judgmental of groups, that just are so separated from those groups that they don't have any exposure. And when they actually just in contact, you immediately realize these are nice people, and your world shifts.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think I heard it somewhere that, we are peer pressured and persuaded by the dead. Like
Ooh.
that's a powerful thing, right?
Yeah.
That thing happened back in history at some point, and we're just following it because it happened. We never thought of why we do it this way. We never thought of why we don't like that group or why we don't like that practice. And it's sometimes it just boils down to it's just a thing that happened that people just kept doing, and we still think like that. And so I say, if you when you have an opinion, decide that opinion for yourself, not just, well, it's expected of me, and I must act in that way, or something wrong with me. This like mannerisms. Some people treat other people in a way because their parents did it, and that's such a box. And that's why I say it's pressure from the dead in a way.
Yeah.
In war, a lot of groups in war, it's just how the soldiers treated each other. If some soldiers, or even who you fought, if they were on the other side of the battle line while they're killing your friends, not actually unless you're older generation, not even your friends, they killed your parents' friends or your ancestors' friends. And, or, they happen to be on the same front line and they fought with you. And, I think there's groups in Europe, for instance, that they fought together, and all of a sudden they love each other. And it's just it's just those historical things that are such impactful that they just lost. But what happened to them is not what's happening to you, and it's not necessarily right. Those are extraordinary circumstances that don't reflect the world of today, and the world changes. And in South Africa, on divisive thought, we had the whole apartheid thing,
Hmm.
which is quite a controversial issue even now. But it's also, at the time, obviously it was a massive issue because there was severe mistreatment of people, and also repercussions on economic, on societal level, and still impacts on the way society functions here. We've got a very unique blend of, in very close proximity, you have separation of groups. One side of a road is certain communities and demographics, and on the other side it's just the other groups just grouped together because certain groups weren't allowed to be in certain places or use certain public facilities, or like, I mean, some groups had to literally have a passport to just be in another area.
Oh
you
my
know
God. Yeah.
like, yeah, it's like subdivision, not even just division by countries, where
Yeah.
so Africans, for instance, can't go to certain countries, or it's a mission because of visas, which those sort of issues are politically tied, or just general population opinion tied. And we had that in a sub scenario. And so also we have a massive divide between the rich and the poor, and in also in close proximity. And but also you have just very an area that's just one group like, and that whole area is just one group, and then an area that's just another group. And so you have this weird mix of separation that's very close and separation that's far. And also, so generationally, you have this kind of tension or gap. So maybe in another country, your younger generation, your older generation, are tight knit. Certain cultures are very family orientated or have similar worldviews because they grew up together, and they so on. Well, there wasn't political, but here you got people that were pressured, or put in a scenario where racism was a big thing, and prejudice, not even just other forms of prejudice, was a big thing. And so maybe your grandparents, or maybe even your parents, because of the timeline, like, obviously the gap's getting further and further away. The people who have those experiences where they're still like, that group of people hurt me, and so I'm still angry at them, and I still judge them in that way, and because of that I have a whole host of ideas about them. And so maybe my parents, actually not in my household, but like maybe a person's parents, they're like, their parents are very judgmental and racist or otherwise. And the newer generations lived in a world that didn't experience that. But sometimes the hate just follows every generation. We can see it in politics and just in daily interactions on the street. It's filtered out a lot, so it's quite rare now. But there's still, your parents will view massively different to the younger generation, and you can see that every time a new set of people hit the industry or hit the politics. You can see the shift in ideals and how prolific that generational gap of viewpoints and beliefs that was forced by systems that certain groups thought was right, and then later on history proved that it wasn't great. It was, I mean, in fact, there was elements that was terrible. um, but at some point, people need to move away from that and acknowledge the world for what it is, and not an element of what it was. And but also, I see a lot of hope in the new generation because they're exposed to a broader world. And but that creates not as close families sometimes, and a bit of tension, and a bit of generational hate. And so maybe that's unique here to some degree, and as is would be the case elsewhere. But we've got our unique way it happens. Yeah.
Yeah. It's another very powerful example. And I mean, it's something that, like, I mean, I can relate to through the Armenian genocide. example I gave, these traumas that we face, like they stick around, and they stick around longer than our lifetimes sometimes. So like some groups still have ancient hate toward each other from things that happened from people that they don't even know. They that aren't even related to them anymore. And it's so painful for me to see when people still carry these burdens of the past that they didn't even live. But you can see it. You can see it in the way that people view the world. You can see it in the assumptions people make, in the way they view themselves. And it's a very hard thing to break out of. And that's what makes these cycles, this intergenerational trauma so powerful, because it does seep in. It seeps in through the assumptions you teach, the lessons you teach your children, the way you talk about people. And it is so pervasive, and it does require you to think, to look back and think, where did this come from? Did it come from, where did it come from? And does it make sense for me to keep it going? And I think when you look back far enough, you'll see that like a lot of the assumptions we have are arbitrary. And
Yeah.
and recognizing the arbitrariness of it means that if it was arbitrary to get there, then you can come up with an arbitrary reason to get rid of it.
Yeah. I had an interaction that's at some point that I found just interesting. I'm not like, necessarily for or against it, but I was on, this, actually, I was on this date, and, it was a nice girl, but she had these ideas, which a lot of people do, of, the guy must provide, the guy must pay for everything, and the guy must put the effort in to win them over, and it's not a two-way street. And you know I can understand if there's reasons you come up with this conclusions, but it turned out that it was just, oh, well, that's how it is, or that's how it was, or things that come from way society were in the past, or even manners or mannerisms. like it's good, because it's respect and way you treat people. But when your ideas are just because it is, I mean, those things came from a story where it was forms of oppression, where the upper class would you know try to behave in ways that the lower class wasn't taught to. And so, I think there's good outcomes came from these things, but it's also, I think it's good to be cognizant of why we do the things we do, um, and why, we have the opinions we do. Because, when you ask someone, I find that that's very interesting, ways of thinking. But, why? Or, it's like when families can say you can only marry these people because of that reason.
Mm-hmm.
Just why? Because it feels ignorant when you don't have a why. When you say, well, there's people who are dead do it, or, other people do it. And because they do it, that means that I'm sanctioned to do it. And you can get in trouble for that. But also, maybe you act in ways that aren't ideal, and maybe it's not your fault that that's on you, but maybe it is something that you have a better responsibility to tackle, and don't just accept every idea that every other person does that's around you. Make your opinions, be the person that you feel like the world deserves and the people around you deserve, and have the opinions that are the truth, and not just what you feel that the broader population believes, and or the broader the people around me believe, and they could never be wrong. And a lot of societal problems are because people believe that other people's ideas that they come up with for specific reasons can't be wrong, because they are associated with authority, or
Mm. Yeah.
So yeah, isn't it? Authorities, we just take it as they're in a position of authority
Yeah.
in relative to me. Everything they have got in their perspective, I must have. It's like this borrowing of perspective, you know? I'll steal their person's perspective with no life journey and no understanding of why I took it.
Well, I think so. I think there's some really good points there. I think a lot of times we take the perspective of our parents, for instance, because they are the first authority that we learn and we know. And yeah, when your parents tell you to think a certain way, it's common for people to kind of think that way and to keep that thought going on and keep it going on without thinking about where it comes from. You should definitely look for your truth, not someone else's truth. When you accept someone else's perspective whole cloth, you're kind of accepting like someone else's truth, which can be fine if it like, if it fits in your with your truth, but you should understand whether it does fit in with your truth. I've mentioned before, people who know me know I love reading. I read a lot of books on psychology and history and philosophy, and in doing so, I am getting another person's perspective, and in a lot of cases, it does sometimes shift my perspective. But I don't think it's like I'm doing it because it's an authority figure and this book told me I should have this perspective, so I need to have this perspective. But it's more that if I'm reading something and it's resonating with me, I say like, okay, I learn a little bit about myself and I get to see like, oh, this other person who doesn't know me, who lived maybe like generations ago, thought this kind of the same thing that I thought and came to a similar conclusion. So maybe there's something there and something there that deserves a little bit of a deeper look. And I have
Yeah.
there's a really beautiful analogy from Plato on this, on perspective. And it's Plato's analogy of the cave that I can go into. And it is related to this idea of like the power of perspective and being stuck in certain perspectives.
Yeah.
So the analogy goes like this. Imagine we're prisoners in a cave. We're shackled up, so we can't move. We can't move our bodies. We can only look forward at a wall, and that wall is illuminated by a flame that's behind us. We lose track of time. Who knows how much time we've been in this cave? Days, months, years. And the only thing that we can really see are the shadows of on the flame as as the shadows move and dance as people walk to and walk beside the flame, basically. So all we see, all we experience is the shadows on the wall and maybe some sounds that we start to attribute to the shadows. So suddenly, as time goes on, we only see the world through these shadows. These shadows become so real to us. But then you become free. You're freed from your crimes and you get to see the world as it is. You come out of the cave and the light is bright. You're seeing the sunlight for the first time and you see these three-dimensional people and you see animals and you see like trees and you see water and you're so excited. You rush back to tell me about all of the things in the real world. And as you're telling me these things, I'm like, I say like, oh, look, the shadows are dancing. And because I still can't see you, I'm still looking at the wall. And you tell me about all these things in the world and how this wall, these shadows aren't real. These aren't the real world. And I say you must have gone mad. You clearly lost your eyes. This is the real world.
Powerful.
Yeah. It really shows that like when you are, it is so easy to be stuck in this cage. Perspective can be a cage that if we never question it, if we never look at it, we start to, what we're actually seeing is like a projection of our own psyche. And it kind of reinforces itself. And when you never question your perspective, You assume that this is the world, and you are only seeing the world through a very, very narrow lens. It's clear to
Yeah.
us, right? It's clear to us who see the world in a more holistic way that, oh, the person in that cave, they're not seeing the real world. But to that person in the cave, they are seeing the world, and you're not seeing the world.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's not as black and white as we think. It's there's complexity, and there's a world we're all just trying to understand. It's I don't think it's a given that we just are given everything we need to understand what's really going on. I think some of it you have to find, and sometimes if it's important, that's your journey to make. And maybe if it's trivial, maybe you don't want to take that journey, and that's cool. That makes sense. But just forgive yourself if where you are is not correct. I often say, like, I've heard this thing. I currently believe it. I have no other insight, and so I'm just gonna say it. It's truth. Could be wrong. I haven't really invested time. I don't feel qualified to really answer this, but hey, this is where I'm at with on this issue, and that I don't feel that there's something wrong with me if I realize that maybe it wasn't the best stance. It's just where I was at. But if it's important to you, I think you want it, it's important to take a stance that's of value.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important to know what your values are. And I've heard a lot of people, like, I have heard people say, like, I believe this because I do, and that's it. They don't really have a deeper answer for why they believe something or why they have the perspective they have. And I've talked to my own mother, and she said, like, oh, sometimes she's too busy to do this work. And yeah, it does take a lot of work. But I look back and I think to myself, well, this is some of the most important work that I've done. Why wouldn't we want to question our own perspective and to, like, have more choice, more say in how we see the world?
No, I mean, yeah, there's there's important things in the world that affects how you behave, and maybe there's things that you value, like economic systems, or classic the environment. If you just think, well, the people around me are doing that, they're taking terrible care of the environment, and then think to yourself, well, maybe I think it's actually really cool if we preserve this beautiful world for another generation. And maybe if you never thought about it, you'd never realize that this is such a cool big part of what I value. And now I've learned, like, how I can really you know like feel and you know create a world that what I value is reflected in it. And I think that maybe step would have never come if someone hadn't stopped and been like, why is it important? This, like, humanitarian things, like, sure, like, being a good person is a nice notion, but just doing things, it's not actually, like, there's not the intent, right? So if other people say it's good, well, just figure out why it's good, why it's important to the world or yourself, and say, I'm helping my community. And that's really cool, because if we don't look out for each other, who will? And makes a lot of sense. And when I do good for the community, it's fulfilling. And in return, they do good for me. And I could have just done things just cause, but when you realize the value and the impact what you do has on the world, then you have reason to really push and do it. And sometimes you do stuff that sounds good on paper and it's a nice CV, but really it's inconsequential, and for your value system is meaningless, and it's just a bit of a show. But maybe you're not doing it intentionally, and you just never wanted to know why you do things.
Yeah, I think that's a really, I think that's an excellent thing that we can start to wrap up on. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to conclude on? Or I mean, that was excellent on its own.
I would say give perspectives a chance. Don't be scared of a little bit of debate. It's a thought experiment. It's not committing to any viewpoints. It's just taking your thoughts, experimenting, and developing them as you work through your thoughts. As you have your thoughts challenged, it helps. Just talking to someone about something, maybe that like unravels it, and like, now I really understand why I believe that and why they believe that. And you know, a lot of the best people out there are they're they're behind masks, or they're hidden in the shadows, in the sense that you you don't understand what that person's really about. And so what's in front of you is someone with this, great ambitions and this life story of, you know maybe they want to be what their parents weren't. And so this is why they do what they do. And, they've got all these cool ideas, and it maybe it's not even the idea, it's just how they think. And you other sides of the fence, but damn, they think in an interesting way. And maybe that's enough. Maybe what they're saying is just a nice collaborating in the sense of learning what are we about and understanding the world. And if people have different hobbies to you and interests, there's a very good reason why they do, right? When people pick careers, people have a good reason, generally. And so if people do something that you considered bizarre, like I've talked about, live action role playing, or, board games, or they like anime, there's prejudice against that. Maybe they like it for deep reasons. Oh, they're not just watching child cartoons. Maybe it's they love the underlying societal reflections and themes, and they love the depth of character, and it lets them, even exercise a bit of play, that thing we sometimes forget. And yeah, just be open to the world. The world is maybe it's not as it appears, and there's a great journey to learn how to see the world more for what it is. And I think only good can come out of it. There's a lot of gems and a lot of beauty out there that you haven't seen yet, and it'll create optimism in the world. And maybe not having the full perspective is a gift, because we can only grow our perspective and only learn. And our perspectives are truly our individual perspectives, not because anyone else has them, not because even the world or the environment says X. It's the journey we learned and we experienced, and it's ever going. You never stop. You never are locked in as this is the person you are forever. And I challenge you to keep learning more about yourself and keep evolving, or just becoming more of who you are and what you think. And don't feel peer pressured or insecure about what you're thinking and the journey you're on. You're human, and that's great. Just do your best, and like you were saying with your friend in Europe, he'll figure it out, right? If he's got talents and skills and things that are cool about them, the people will see that. He will find his group.
Yeah.
We're all on a journey.
Yeah, trust yourself and trust others.
Exactly.
Well, that was a yeah, I have nothing else to add. That was a really beautiful point to end on. And you've just been full of such wonderful wisdom this episode. I mean, in all episodes, but I feel like this one especially, I can tell you're ready to get back on that podcast, on the podcast circuit. So,
Yeah. The world's been making me think, and I'm just enjoying getting back to the opportunities to explore those thoughts. And yeah, so hopefully some awesome content's on the way. I've got some really interesting speakers I trying to write together. And yeah, more thoughts like this I'd love to share with the world. And so
I
yeah,
for
keep
one
an eye,
am
folks.
I for one am like I'm really excited about these thoughts you've been having, these reflections. I love it when people are like reflecting on the things that they're experiencing, and I think this episode really shows like the depth of the reflections you've been doing in your life, but also more recently. And so thank you so much for sharing them with us.
Yeah. And thank you so much for having me on and sharing your thoughts. And yeah, also reflecting a bit of where you are in life. And yeah, I think as we do more episodes, we get like a nice perspective of our life journeys and where
Yeah.
we've
And we
come
can
from. One day we're gonna like be like, but we'll see how like like old men there like wow, like the person I knew when this started is nothing like I thought there would be now,
yeah.
and maybe that's a beautiful thing.
It totally is a beautiful thing, and it's fun. It's like we're on these journeys that are separate but also like intersect. You know, right? Even though we're like half the world away, we're like on these intertwined life journeys, which is really awesome. It's a
Yeah, it's
beautiful
really
thing.
cool.
So thank you again, Stephen, and thank you for listeners and watchers for experiencing this with us. Um, Follow the podcast on Instagram. Like and share the podcast on YouTube and Spotify if you haven't. It helps out. Thank you so much, everyone. And as always, embrace your chaos with kindness.